conference in Bucharest at Eurocrim 24. I'm here with Janne Kivivuori, who's a professor at the University of Helsinki, and we will talk about your life as a criminologist. And the first question I want to ask is a general question of why did you become a criminologist?
First of all, thank you for having me here. It was a great honor to be invited to this discussion. It's always very difficult to answer the question why you became what you are. I think, and originally it was a pure coincidence because I was a sociology master student, and in our part of our curriculum was an internship for 3 months in some institution, and the people at the sociology department simply chose in a random manner a place of internship for me, and that place happened to be the National Research Institute of Legal Policy, Finland, which was the Criminological Research Institute of Finland, part of the Finnish government in a way. So there I was given a kind of a research assistant duties with the criminological unit, and that it was, in a way, it was a coincidence.
Yeah. Because
during my studies there was no studies in sociology, there was no kind of emphasis on criminology, but when I became part of the institute, it kind of launched a very long-standing career in criminology, so that was a coincidence in the very beginning.
Yeah. So what was the topic that was kind of catching your eye or really interest? Was it something specific, or was it just in general that this field interested you when you did the internship?
Yeah, it really, I found it super interesting. My then supervisor and mentor, Kaupo Aromaa, whose name is probably well known to at least senior criminologists, he kind of included me in his projects, and one of the very first projects in which I worked as a research assistant was the International Self-Report Delinquency Study. You know that? It's still going on, and I'm still in a way quite deeply involved in that project. But my first during the first summer of my during the first fall of my work at the Institute of Criminology involved data collection at schools. So I went personally to schools to collect the data of the International Self-Report Delinquency Study. So that was really something that really caught my attention, and also Kaupo was the kind of a person who drew people, wanted to include people and even young scholars to also using the data. So that also launched my research career in the sense that I used these first self-report studies in the beginning of 1990s in my PhD thesis in sociology. So it started there.
So would you say he was also the main influence or mentor, so to speak, for your research career back in the days?
Indeed, he was. He was the person who drew me to this field, and a very inspiring leader as well, in my view. And I really, appreciated his willingness to draw in young scholars to do these international projects as well. So it was really, he was a central influencer of Finnish criminology, empirical criminology in 1990s, and of course later on he became the director of the Heuni Institute, which is the United Nations Institute located in Helsinki. And when he became the director of Heuni, I became his successor at the Institute of Criminology, or National Research Institute of Legal Policy, which is its official name.
You mentioned that there was no program in criminology at that time, and you got in by sort of accident and by training with Roma. How did the Finnish criminology develop now? You're one of the most prominent speakers of Finnish criminology. Did it develop from that point where you didn't have programs, or is it still somewhat you get into it by accident or by having someone?
The scene has changed completely subsequently. If you are asking me about the history of Finnish criminology, there are actually kind of two approaches you can take. You can look at the general intellectual trends and developments in criminology and crime research in Finland, or you can look at how criminology is represented at the university. And these are two approaches that I could easily speak for hours or on the history of Finnish criminology. But if you allow, I can in a nutshell describe how the Finnish criminological field emerged. And as I see it, it contains kind of three stages. The first stage of Finnish criminology is associated with a single name, Veli-Verkko, whom you know very well because you are also a homicide researcher. Almost every criminologist knows Verkko's laws and his long time series dating back to 18th century homicide records of Finland and Sweden. Veli-Verkko was a statistician, but also, I guess, he could be today characterized as a biosocial criminologist, an interdisciplinary perspective to crime and homicide in particular. And he was active from 1930s to his death in 1955. And he was kind of a founder of Finnish criminology and still an authority who is known abroad as well, at least among the homicide research field. After his death, there was a kind of a discontinuity in the development of Finnish criminology, and it started to emerge again during the 1960s. And in that context, it was quite strongly connected to criminal justice reforms and policy debates. I have in one of our Finnish language textbooks, I have called this period, which started during the 1960s, the criminal justice policy oriented stage, which actually lasted quite long, maybe something like 40 years. Then in something like maybe 20 years ago, the field started to increase in Finland as well. There were more scholars involved in this topic and so on. And it also became more kind of multidisciplinary field, interdisciplinary field. And also I think this last stage, which I call the interdisciplinary stage, I think it was launched or characterized by young scholars increasingly orienting towards international criminological community. Maybe the creation of the European Society had something to do with it. And young scholars started to increasingly publish their work in English as peer-reviewed articles, and it all opened up the field in a new manner. And this brings the story to the academic aspect of the field. For a very long period, the Finnish criminology was quite heavily kind of represented by this government research institute, which dominated the field of research. But in 2015, this institute was amalgamated or transferred to the University of Helsinki. So we used to be kind of a government research arm, and then it was transferred to the university in 2015. And in my view, this was a very kind of a big transformation for the academic standing of criminology in Finland, because after that we started to develop criminology as a study track at the University of Helsinki. I personally devoted quite a lot of energy and time from 2016 to create first the master's study track, and 2018 we moved or joined the doctoral program of social sciences, creating a criminology study track at the doctoral level, and currently we are also, just as we speak now, making a move towards creating a bachelor level study track. So all these changes in the position of criminology were in a way triggered by the 2015 decision to transfer criminology from government research institute to university. So it was a very big change for us. And also there were other new developments. For example, in 2019 we created a Finnish Society of Criminology. I personally made the initiative to do that because I felt that since we were becoming a kind of a normal academic discipline in the university context, it also kind of required that we had this scientific society, which is also kind of independent from direct links with the state organizations. So these developments transformed the profile and outline of Finnish criminology, and it has also boosted or increased the kind of interdisciplinary nature of our studies. Many of my colleagues, for example, come from sociology, as I do personally, but there are also psychologists and lawyers and social psychologists, and it is an interdisciplinary discipline in a sense, as it currently exists in Finland. So it's been a kind of it was in a way coincidence that Finnish government made this decision to transform this institute into part of Helsinki University, but I saw it as a window of opportunity. But now we must, in a way, seize the moment, and I personally devoted a lot of energy in creating the master's study track and then the doctoral study track, and now we are in the discussions with the faculty to create the bachelor study track.
So you took the opportunity to actually really develop also programs that were non-existing before, in order to also to have future criminologists, actually trained criminologists,
indeed.
That not fall into by accident, but really choose the fields and are able to develop their academic career also in the field.
Yeah, that's true. I think it's important. Of course, there has been, after Veli Verkko, there have been individual scholars and professors, often from the law departments, who have been quite extremely interested in empirical matters and also have been extremely skillful in empirical analysis. But I think over the recent decade or so, one of the goals has been to make it more systematic, to really have these master's level study tracks in criminology, so people really who are interested have the possibility to study criminology as the main topic. Institutionally, these study tracks are located in broader social science master's programs. So in a way, to give an example, the role of criminology in the social sciences master program is the same as role of sociology within that same program. So it simultaneously gives the student the possibility to really focus on criminology, but there is also the additional benefit that the students can also study sociology and social psychology and demography at the same time, in the same. So it combines the need for specialized knowledge in criminology with a broader social science perspective. So I think it's been quite a good solution. I know that there have been in the European criminology circles these discussions whether criminology should be at the bachelor level at all, should start from the master's level, and there are pros and cons in this. So we have tried to strike balance between, broadness and specialization in criminology.
Interesting. So it's quite a development actually that Finnish criminology has gone through in the last years, and you were all part of it. So you were part of the history of criminology in Finland, so to speak, and that also leads to your research interests because you're highly interested in the history of criminology. Yeah. So can you talk more about what you're currently doing or what your research projects were in that area?
Yeah. I think you can, if I would have to name kind of two research lines which I have been particularly strongly involved in, this would be the creation of crime indicators like survey systems, and also the second one is the history of crime and criminology, historical criminology. And as I see it, these are to some extent connected because my interest in the history of criminology and crime started with a project which led to the publication of the monograph Discovery of Hidden Crime. Well, that book described how the self-report delinquency survey or self-report crime survey was invented during the 1930s and 1940s. What were the aims of those who invented it, and how they used it, and how the results impacted criminology. So having created Finnish systems, I moved to the study of the deeper history of these indicator systems. So these two main research lines are interconnected. In regard to my approach to history of criminology, I think this book, Discovery of Hidden Crime, kind of launched the perspective I was to continue later on as well. And that was the goal to examine the history of criminology from the perspective of data and instruments. So, the standard narrative is the perspective of theories and paradigms. The classical narrative is that during the Enlightenment period, there were these classical scholars like Beccaria, Montesquieu, Jeremy Bentham, and lots of philosophers thinking about crime and criminal justice policy. And then during the 19th century, there was this period of positivism, Lombroso and also the social theorists emphasizing social causation. But in my research program, in a way, I wanted to take the perspective of the data, and as I did in the study of the survey method, and subsequently, because I had described the invention of the survey method as a very important kind of declaration of independence from state data, crime records, administrative statistics, and survey method was a way of making criminology independent from state control dependent data. So after that, I asked the question how this pact of criminology with state data was originally emerging, And that led my interest to the creation of the modern concept of national statistics. And over the recent years, I have studied the emergence of the modern type of national crime statistics during 1820s, 1830s. It was most strongly connected with the French innovation of national statistics of crime during 1820s. But as I see it, the creation of national statistics was kind of pan-European phenomenon, even though the French were the first to create a really modern sort of crime yearbook in a sense. Its emergence immediately led to a strong research explosion in the European continent and later on also in the UK, in England. So over the recent years I have focused on this, and there's going to be a monograph on that appearing later on this fall. So it's, in a sense, I see it as a prequel to the discovery of hidden crime. So trying to examine how a data innovation impacted the study of crime in a decisive manner. So in a nutshell, this is my current research focus, and as I began, it is kind of influenced by the fact that I am active also as person who uses and develops currently these indicator systems, like the European Homicide Monitor, which is well known to you, and the Finnish Homicide Monitor, and indeed, you asked me how I started my career in Finland. In 1995 already we launched the Finnish self-report delinquency study, and 2002 the Finnish Homicide Monitor. Then 2012 we reformed the Finnish Crime Victim Survey, and I've been centrally involved in the creation of these systems. So I have tried to advance the crime measurement systems of today, and also to understand their deep history and how the data has impacted our discipline, its development.
That's a specialty. You've basically worked with all crime indicators, but you've also tried to apply them or go back in time, which is your specialty, which is very innovative in a sense. When we talk about the historic homicide monitor, for instance, you go back in time and measure back in time. So what were the challenges there in this project, specifically the homicide monitor, the historic homicide monitor?
Yeah, that's an interesting, thank you for asking about it, because I sometimes think that if you study current homicide and or current victim surveys and so on, you always need to wait for more data points.
Exactly.
And if you are very impatient while waiting, one way you can expand the data resources is to expand them backwards in time. So maybe that's a kind of a personality question. If you're impatient, you must
be patient to wait for the data.
Yeah. So historical homicide monitor was kind of I see it as an extension of the European Homicide Monitor, which you are very familiar with. And European Homicide Monitor was created as a means of disaggregating and analyzing modern homicide in the original project about 15 years ago. And there is this manual of how one can disaggregate homicide in order to understand it better. So the idea of the historical homicide monitor was to create a similar instrument which would be compatible with the European homicide monitor, but at the same time applicable in distant past. And in the original historical homicide monitor project, we developed the kind of analytical framework for the study of early modern homicide in the Nordic countries. Finland, Sweden, Denmark were the countries from which we collected court documents and coded them into this numeric format, which is the historical homicide monitor and which is compatible with the European homicide monitor. So in a sense, this research line was I would call it perhaps long duration homicide research, because the very analytic core, the instrument of analysis, was meant to enable comparison over the long duration period. So we compared early modern homicide with modern homicide, which was analyzed using the European homicide monitor. So we expanded the time scale to cover something like 400 years. Of course, we had only early modern period and modern period, and we still don't have what is in between those eras. But nevertheless, I think it was worthwhile, because the instrument as such is usable and can be used in the study of any period. In my view, homicide as a phenomenon is perhaps unique in the sense that it allows this kind of a long distance comparison. Many other crime types, crime types emerge as a result of social development. Cyber crimes did not exist 50 years ago, and so on. And many crimes and criminalizations are highly variable, and why they emerge and why they vanish is such a sociological and criminological question. But as I see it, homicide is perhaps unique in the sense that it really enables long duration comparisons, and quite interesting results were emerging in that pilot study as well. And we hope that people become aware of this instrument and use it if possible when they study in distant periods the lethal violence of the past.
Well, homicide is the crime to measure, because it's the easiest to measure, but still you faced quite a lot of challenges. You also had an interdisciplinary team. I imagine to measure homicide backwards is quite difficult,
Yeah, there are lots of difficulties, and a team as such which created the historical homicide perspective was I acquired funding from the Nordic Council of Criminology and created a team so that from each country there was a pair of scholars. One of them was a historian and one was a criminologist. So this project was interdisciplinary in that way also, that it increased and actually required the cooperation of historians and criminologists. These perspectives needed to be combined in that project, and of course the challenges are multiple in coding these very old court protocols. But in the future, I would say that automatic text recognition tools and various innovations can make it easier to process these old handwritten documents. And also I think one kind of a lesson from this project was that it is not always so that if you go back in time, the validity of the data becomes kind of worse or lesser, because, for example, in earlier times, there were more cases where the time from violence to death was longer. So in many cases, the victims themselves, victims of homicide, could give information. So nowadays, when medical help is so much more developed, homicide victims very rarely about what happened. But when you go back in time, there are cases where the victim has given information.
Interesting. One wouldn't think that this is the source of information usually in homicide, but it's interesting how historical perspective can also change in regard to these elements.
Indeed, and also we noted that these early modern documents at the courts really they were interested in attributing blame rather than understanding the case. So it taught us something about present day investigations, because the police data and so on, they actually contain quite a lot of information about the motives and a broader interest to understand the case. So there are lots of challenges and differences, but I think it was worthwhile for criminologists and historians to get this long duration perspective. And of course, they must underscore that there have been, really important long-distance homicide studies by Professor Eisner and the classical article in Crime and Justice by Gurr. But these usually have homicide rates in specific towns or localities as units of observation. So the idea of the historical homicide monitor was the same as in the European homicide monitor, to disaggregate, to break the phenomenon into different aspects. So it enables a closer analysis of the patterns of crime, and also it is important to underscore that the data which results from the application of this historical homicide monitor instrument is individual level data, as is European modern data. Each row in the data is a victim or an offender, so it is possible to conduct individual level analysis.
That's an important point. And you said you've gone back in time with homicides. You are currently still collecting homicide data. You've been involved and still are involved in the ISRDs, International Self-Reported Delinquency Studies, with juveniles, with crime surveys. So basically you've covered more or less all crime measurement tools one can hope for in a country. What comes next? So what are your projects in that regard with these different indicators?
Well, that's a difficult question. My projects have usually grown kind of organically from the current ones. That I don't have currently a master plan, but I probably will continue the study of history of criminology from specifically data perspective and the perspective of instruments. I think that's something that still interests me quite a lot. But also I hope to remain active in the international self-reported delinquency study. As you know, we are currently in the fourth sweep, and the data collection window of the fourth sweep is closing at the end of this year, and the steering committee has already started to plan for the ISRD 5 sweep, and the whole system is becoming more global in the sense that we have more countries from outside Europe, and it's going to be quite a challenge in the future to keep it going. And I hope to remain active in that front as well, and also to think about the global comparisons and what challenges are involved in the global reach of this kind of youth crime survey as the ISRD is. Some of the challenges I see as a bit similar as in historical long duration studies, because the societies in the historical perspective differ quite a lot as they do in the present world. So the challenges of comparison are to a degree similar, but well, I noticed from your question that a kernel of truth that my research activities are perhaps too broad. I should concentrate more. And I think there is a kind of a kernel of truth in that, and I think it goes back to the early stages of my career when the Finnish criminological community was very small. So we have very few researchers, and there was no possibility to really specialize. The people had to be, a bit general in their research interests to meet the demands of the society. So maybe because this was the case in the early part of my career, I still have a bit too many activities, but maybe it's also something one can draw inspiration from and see the similarities in the various fields as well.
I find it rather an advantage to have the overview of all these different tools as you have, because you can also tie them together. And I know that you have also plans or projects to combine different measurements and put them together, so you have an overview of all these different crime measurement tools, as well as the local and the international perspective. And you mentioned also that it's enriching to have these international comparisons as well as historical comparisons. What do you, as a Finnish but also international scholar, what do you draw from these international perspectives?
I think they're absolutely essential for criminology. We try to take an international comparative perspective. At the same time, there is a need to respect the context. I think in some respects we also need to acknowledge that the societies are quite different, and I think this comes up quite strongly in the discussions and debates of criminal justice policy. Because if you evaluate measures and study what works, it usually is the case that, for example, if you do a systematic review on a special measure, maybe 90% of the research has been conducted in the US, and the remaining 10% is heavily dominated by the UK and Australia and Canada. So we lack a similar kind of evaluation, as strong an evaluation tradition as in these countries. Of course, Switzerland is perhaps an exception because of your studies and the studies of Martin Kilias and so on. But the problem is that the societies are so different that you can't necessarily be sure that what works in some place works in another place, and it goes both ways in a way. So I think, especially in so-called, I'm not sure if I can say this, perhaps I can say applied criminology or criminal justice research, the respect for the context is quite strong, needed to be able to produce knowledge which can be applied in a specific country. But in terms of the study of crime, criminal behavior, and so on, the international systems are, in my view, absolutely the core of criminology, and it's great to see so much of that kind of work in a conference like this, European Society of Criminology conference. And each year you see more and more, comparative research as well.
Exactly. So, what is the more, you said you have an international approach, but the Finnish approach, so what works in Finland, what type of information could you gather now for policy implications with your different research that you did?
Well, most of my own research is kind of a curiosity-driven basic research, but during my career I have been involved also in many kind of applied research projects and so on, and I think it is important to respect the context, and for example the Nordic context is characterized by an advanced welfare state regime, and that gives a kind of a starting point for crime prevention. in our area. So one has to know the kind of basic sociological stratum on which you can build crime prevention. It's a big discussion, and I guess we need more robust causal research, evaluating the measures, crime prevention measures, but also criminal justice measures. Yeah.
But it also starts with the good data foundation that yes, you specifically contributed to in Finland. So my last question is to round it up: how would you want to be remembered as a criminologist when you look back at what you've already achieved, what you are going still to achieve? So what is going to be your approach on that?
Well, it is not for me to, judge my influence in criminology, but maybe I could go back to where we started this discussion, the creation of the, master's study track in criminology at University of Helsinki, and the creation of the doctoral seminar and doctoral education of criminology at the University of Helsinki, and now our efforts to build the bachelor level education. Well, these young students who are attending these study tracks, I guess one hopes that this is part of the impact on Finnish society, and maybe on international developments if some of those students end up as researchers and become active in international projects as well.
Exactly, and continue the work you've been doing in the last years, maybe. Well,
yeah, one hopes so.
Thank you so much for this discussion, Janne Kivivuori, and for answering all my questions.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure and an honor to be invited to this discussion. Thank you, Nora.